Hi everyone and welcome back to Watches and Politics. I'm Eddie Schipoli, and so far we've traced how watches came to be, how they evolved during wartime, and how they were rocked by quartz crisis in the 20th century. But today we step into another fascinating chapter, one that blends elegance, ceremony, and intrigue. We're diving into the world of diplomacy, monarchs and emperors, presidents and revolutionaries, gifts and negotiations. And we'll ask a deceptively simple question: what role have watches played in politics? Because let's be honest, watches were never just about telling time. They've always been about power, about control, and about signaling status. When a head of state gives another leader a timepiece, it's never just a gift, it's a message. We value precision, we value time, and we value you. And because watches speak a universal language across cultures and systems, they've become one of the most trusted diplomatic tools. In the 1500s and 1600s, when watches were rare luxuries, monarchs already used them as symbols of goodwill and technological superiority. Take Tsar Peter the Great, for example. On his 1700s visit to England, he bought pocket watches as gifts, showing Russia's intention to modernize and align with European powers. Or Louis XIV of France, the Sun King as they used to call him, who gave French-made watches to visiting dignitaries. These weren't trinkets. They were statements of culture, of innovation, and of influence. That's the thing about diplomatic gifts. They're not random. A well-chosen watch sends a message about respect, about political ambition, and sometimes about technological superiority. By the 18th century, Swiss watches became deeply tied to diplomacy. Switzerland's neutrality, combined with unmatched craftsmanship, positioned its watchmakers as natural providers of symbolic gifts. Many pieces bore royal crests, portraits, or personal engravings with political meaning. King George IV of Britain famously adored briguet, amazing perpetual calendars and minute repeaters in his collection, aligning himself with other European royals who collected the same. Meanwhile, China's emperors couldn't resist horological gifts. In 1793, Britain sent magnificent clocks and watches to Emperor Qianlong. Officially, he dismissed them, publicly talking against them. However, privately, he became obsessed, filling his palace collections, and after his death, we learned of all those watches remaining under his collection. Even when diplomacy failed, like William Amherst's ill-fated mission in 1816, the watches remained in China as political relics, reminders of negotiations that failed but still left their mark. Now, diplomatic watches weren't random tokens. They were crafted as deliberate symbols. They were tools of diplomacy. They symbolized mutual respect or ambition. Sometimes they said, let's work together. Other times they whispered, we are more advanced than you. But they always carried a meaning. In Spain, Jacques Drous astonished King Ferdinand VI with automaton clocks, so ingenious that they secured a switch entry into Spanish markets, a diplomatic and an economic win. In India, British officials presented brigade pieces to Mahajaras, blending diplomacy with displays of imperial power. Lord Curzon, for example, gave a brigade to the Mahajara of Jaipur. Not because he was generous, but because he understood the power of gift. A timepiece from Britain said, "We recognize your status, and you, in return, recognize our power." Similarly, Queen Victoria's purchase of a pendant Patek Philippe at London's 1851 Great Exhibition wasn't just a personal indulgence. It became a royal endorsement that catapulted the brand into international prestige. Watches have made their way into coronations, alliances, treaties, even peace conferences. In 1815, at the Congress of Vienna, Vacherov Constantin was asked to create pocket watches engraved with the words, "The arms fall, peace is signed." These weren't just souvenirs, they were part of the narrative of European unity after Napoleon. Some diplomatic watch stories read like film scripts, though. In 1921, the Maharaja of Patiala visited Geneva and bought the equivalent of $1 million in watches and jewelry at Vacheron Constantin. King Farouk of Egypt ordered custom complications adorned with Egypt royal crests. These purchases weren't private whims. They were acts of soft power. By patronizing Swiss watchmakers, these rulers tied their image to European luxury, signaling both wealth and legitimacy to allies and, of course, rivals as well. And after World War II, watches became tokens of gratitude and remembrance. The people of Geneva presented pocket watches to Allied leaders Churchill, Truman, Stalin, and de Gaulle. De Gaulle's watch, designed by Louis Cotier, symbolized resistance with Joan of Arc on the dial and a cross Lorraine hour hand. On the back, a giant V for victory wrapped around the globe. It was more than a timepiece. It was a letter of thanks, a symbol of France's liberation. The Swiss Confederation later gifted Queen Elizabeth II a platinum and diamond Vacheron Constantin for her wedding. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a nation honoring a monarch, binding two traditions through craftsmanship. And then came the Cold War. The Cold War made watches even more politically charged. Omega's Speedmaster became the first watch on the moon and a symbol of US technological might. Special editions were gifted to diplomats and astronauts with engravings of shared achievement. US President John F. Kennedy received not one but two iconic Omegas, one from a close friend before he became a president, and another one from Berlin's mayor after his famous Ich bin eine Berliner speech. Henry Kissinger reportedly offered a Rolex Datejust during armed talks with the Soviet diplomats. Meanwhile, in the Soviet bloc, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara were matching Rolexes, symbols of revolutionary toughness and unity. So imagine, on one side of the Iron Curtain, a Rolex meant capitalism and success. On the other, it meant revolutionary grit. And it wasn't just the West. Japan started using watches in diplomacy as well. Prime Minister Ikeda gifted President Eisenhower a Seiko Lord Marvel. That wasn't just a nice gesture. It was a symbol of Japan's recovery and rise as a global power. Middle Eastern royalty also followed suit. King Hussein of Jordan, King Saud of Saudi Arabia, and the Shah of Iran all commissioned personalized Patek Philippe watches for diplomatic missions. Engraved with royal crests, these were tools of respect and recognition. Similarly, in another gesture, France gave an Atmos clock made by Gégé Lecoultre to Franklin D. Roosevelt. This clock, which basically runs on air and it runs forever, became a symbol of alliance, time, continuity, endurance, everything that allies stood for. Watches were everywhere, in every corner of diplomacy. Whether it was Roosevelt or Castro, Churchill or de Gaulle, Kennedy or Eisenhower, timepieces helped shape the language of politics, friendship, and influence. But gifting wasn't the only way watches played politics. Sometimes simply wearing or not wearing a watch sent a message. Lyndon B. Johnson flaunted the Rolex day date, which then quickly was nicknamed the President's Watch. Nelson Mandela, by contrast, wore modest, understated pieces as sign of humility, whereas Xi Jinping avoids luxury models to reinforce his anti-corruption agenda. Pope Francis favored simple timepieces to signal modesty and service. Even removing a watch can make headlines. Emmanuel Macron of France slipped off his watch mid-interview during France's pension protests, sparking debates about wealth, optics, and leadership. In politics, the wrist is never neutral. Now, not every story is so poetic. Some watches caused controversy, and some of them caused big controversy. Let's talk about Vladimir Putin. His watch collection has raised a lot of eyebrows. The man has been photographed wearing watches that individually are worth far more than his annual salary. We're talking about Patek Philippe perpetual calendars, Lange and Zone turbographs that cost over $1 million. We're talking about F. Pigeon pieces, and you name it. Whatever piece that you think is cool, we have seen in Vladimir Putin's collection. So what's the message? Whether intentionally or not, the watches say, I have power, I have control, and I don't answer to anyone. And then there's the story of Fidel Castro. Early on, Castro was often seen wearing not one, but two Rolex watches to track time zones in different places around the world, like Washington, Moscow, Cuba, and other places. Rolex back then wasn't about showing off. It was about reliability, toughness, and the kind of watch that wouldn't quit, even in the middle of a jungle campaign. But later, Castro stopped wearing them, stopped wearing Rolexes or watches. No more symbols of luxury. That wasn't random. It was part of his image. Not wearing a watch might not tell time, but it definitely tells a story as well. But diplomacy isn't always noble. A gift, never just a gift. A handshake, often a deal. A watch, especially a luxury watch, can carry a lot more than time. It can carry expectations. And watches also became tools of corruption in the world of politics. In South Korea, Rolexes, Daytonas surfaced in bribery scandals. Brazil's Lava Jato case uncovered hublots and tag heuers who were trading like currency. In Malaysia's 1MDB scandal, Richard Milles and Patek Philippe's were bought with stolen money, allegedly. And in Turkey, a single Patek Philippe nearly toppled the government during a corruption probe. Watches also play another role, one more hidden, more covert, more dangerous: money laundering. They're small, they're valuable, they're easy to move across borders, and they hold their value. You can walk into a boutique in Geneva and walk out with $1 million on your wrist. This became such a problem that global regulators like the Financial Action Task Force have stepped in, pushing for stricter anti-money laundering protocols across luxury goods sector. Still, however, in places with weak enforcement, watches remain a favorite laundering tool. Just ask the investigators who looked into Deutsche Bank in 2019, where watches were part of the financial puzzles that regulators failed to solve. From the courts of Europe to the summits of Cold War, from royal extravagance to quiet humility, watches have ticked at the very heart of diplomacy. They've been gifts, bribes, signals, and statements. Silent but powerful tools of politics. A watch never just tells time. It tells a story of who you are, what you value, what the message you want to send to the world. And in our next episode, we'll bring the story to the present tense. Globalization, geopolitics, trade wars, sustainability, even the rise of smartwatches. These forces are reshaping the industry once again. Who wins when tradition meets technology? When luxury collides with lithium? That's episode 6. Don't miss it.